And in closing, thank you for your participation in the 2022 Partners in Action Annual Conference. And now I will introduce the presenter. Please welcome Marc Fisher.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marc Fisher. I'm with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I am presenting with my colleagues from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Sarah Joyce, and Sumayya Menk. I should get my camera off. Thanks for, yeah, there you go, Sarah. There you go. So, yeah, I just want to say hello and welcome to everybody. And I guess I'll just pass it along to Sarah. Sarah can take it away from there.
If I remember to unmute my microphone. It's really nice to meet everyone. I am Sarah Joyce. I am the Community Preparedness Officer for FEMA Region 5. And today, Marc and Sumayya and I are going to go over some preparedness things that you can do as an individual, things for your community, and also for your organization. But I wanted to give you all a moment to meet all three of us and see our faces before we get going. So Sumayya, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute to introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sumayya Menk, and I'm the Regional Preparedness Liaison for FEMA Region 5. So I work along with Sarah and our individual and community preparedness team. And collectively, we work together to build a culture of preparedness, specifically in the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So I'm so excited to be here, and I'm glad you all are able to participate today to learn about the importance of preparedness.
Thank you, Sumayya. So this training that we've created, we've worked with Marc over the years to provide it in many different communities. And so we're really excited to present this to our tribal nation partners. And so really looking for any kind of feedback or anything that you all also have to help us make this training more valuable across communities. So really excited to be here today. For those of you who aren't as familiar with FEMA, our primary role is to coordinate responses to disasters that have occurred when resources are overwhelmed. And our mission really is helping people before, during, and after disasters. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the before and why that before is so helpful and important. Next slide, please, Sumayya. So individual and community preparedness remains committed to building a more secure and more resilient community with the capabilities acquired across the whole community to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. And one of the things that I meant to mention before now is that if you have any questions, feel free to place them in the chat. Raise your hand. We are going to be together for quite a little bit of time today, so I'm really looking forward to interacting with everyone. So before disasters is really when we're talking about raising risk awareness, and we're going to talk a little bit about that during today's presentation. And then also thinking about ways that you can kind of take action within your community and start building resilience, which I'm sure many of you already are. So hopefully this will give people who are already doing some things to build resilience some ideas to further that. And those of you who are like trying to figure that out, hopefully this will give you some building blocks to be moving forward. Individual and community preparedness is the team that Amy is also on our team, but she was unable to join us today, that Sumayya and Amy and I work on, and we work closely with partners like Marc. And the things that we do is we help individuals and communities and tribal nations to be more prepared. We have resources and materials that we'll be sharing with you throughout the presentation, but also trainings like today's training. We also have a few other trainings that I'll go into with you around community preparedness. A big thing that's very valuable and important to us in Region 5 is youth preparedness. So that's something that if you get to know us, we'll definitely be talking with you a lot about, is particular to youth preparedness. We do have a Youth Preparedness Council in Region 5 and always happy to share that information, encourage more youth to get involved, and really learn how to make us a more resilient nation. This coming year, we have a lot of our youth members who are really interested in climate resilience and moving forward efforts like that. And so they're really starting to figure out where commonalities lie in their projects and how they can really build more resilience in the community, particularly about being aware and educating our communities on climate resilience. So in today's presentation, we're going to go over a little bit, like I said, personal preparedness, organizational preparedness. We're going to talk about assessing risks and hazards, both those you can see and those that might not be something that you notice on paper, right? So knowing your community, which I'm sure that people who are on this call do have a good idea about their community and can kind of start putting together, again, what we can see on paper, but then what we also know exists in our community. And also thinking about where some of those strengths lie as well. So when we talk about vulnerability and risk, we also want to talk about where our strengths are. And so really hoping to get into some of that with you all today. So who's with us today? If you can, please place your tribal nation or your organization in the chat. Really excited to see who we're talking with today. And I will try to utilize the chat throughout our discussion today. But if it's not working for people, we can also raise our hand and speak up too. All right, we've got Heidi from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Harold from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and also a citizen of the Delaware tribe. Welcome, Heidi and Harold. Welcome, Kevin. Hi, Pam. Welcome. All right. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how prepared do you think you are? And you can say how prepared you personally feel that you are, or how prepared you feel your organization is. But we really want to know a little bit about, our level of preparedness knowledge. Awesome. I'm seeing a lot more people letting us know where they're at. All right, we've got a preparedness director here. I'm sure that he's going to be high on that. We've got a 2. A 3. So I think we're going to have people kind of at all levels of preparedness with us today. So hopefully those of you who are, doing this work in your community already, please feel free, again, chime into the chat, share helpful tips and ideas throughout the presentation, because all of our experiences are different and our knowledge is different. And so I'm really excited to have everyone here today. All right. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Sumayya. Thank you, Sumayya. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Let me just reshare my screen. All righty. All righty. All right. Print slide. Perfect. All right, so welcome everyone, and thanks, Sarah. We'll actually go ahead and roll right into preparedness. So in this section in particular, I'll be going into depth about individual preparedness and how you all can be personally prepared. So as you all know, we are all continuing to respond to, other natural disasters of different scales simultaneously with, public health emergencies. And, there's really no better time to be involved. As we know, disasters don't wait for a convenient time to happen. We know this with the wildfires that actually, spread across California last year. There's power outages, severe heat throughout the Midwest, and so on. So the reality is that, every U.S. state and territory is at risk of a disaster, and disasters disrupt thousands of lives every year, leaving behind lasting effects on people as well as property. And after a disaster, many others in your community need help as well. And for this reason specifically, local first responders and assistance may not be able to reach you right away. And you and your family can take simple steps now to prepare for emergencies. And you all may be thinking, why do I need to be prepared? I'm here to learn about, preparing my team or my organization or my staff. But, remember, in order to promote others to be prepared, like our staff, volunteers, teachers, our clients, us as individuals need to be prepared as well. And if we aren't prepared and practicing, how can we expect others to do so? So I know we have a lot of individuals with emergency management and preparedness background on the call. So I'll just briefly go over this. But, what's an emergency? So if you're comfortable, feel free to place in the chat. What are some different types of emergencies that come to mind? And while you all are doing that, just to give you a formal definition, the definition of an emergency is a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. So think about how we respond to emergencies. Who do we call? What steps do we take? What happens if no response is taken? And when we are faced with any type of potentially threatening or harmful situation, we immediately take steps to reduce harm. And it doesn't matter if it harms one person or more, it's still an emergency. So some examples of emergencies you can see on this slide are, chemical spills, fires, house fires, heart attacks, leaking gas in the home, your car being stuck in the snow, and much more. These emergencies are often handled by local and first responders, or even with assistance from bystanders like household members, friends, as well as neighbors. And now, what's a disaster then? So what's the difference between an emergency and a disaster? So a disaster, on the other hand, is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or society, causing widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses, which exceeds the ability of an affected community or a society to cope using its own resources. So the difference between an emergency and a disaster is the scale of it. A disaster involves more widespread loss, and it's beyond an individual or household's, capacity. So while local authorities respond to local emergencies, a disaster typically requires additional assistance to manage, such as voluntary organizations that are active in disasters, like the Red Cross, as well as the federal government or tribal government. So, consider the difference between personal emergencies and disasters that impact a large population. So on this slide, you can see that there are two types of disasters. There are natural disasters, which are the disasters caused by natural forces, whereas man-made or human-generated disasters on the right side are caused by activities of human beings. As you take a look at the slide, consider, do you recognize any of these events? Or have you experienced or have been impacted by any of these? And can you think of additional examples or other types? So natural disasters can be sudden, like a tornado or an earthquake, or they can be long lasting and have a slow onset, like a drought or desertification. And additional examples of natural disasters can include floods, hurricanes, wildfires, tsunamis, and more. So human-generated disasters include a range of things. So there's non-intentional disasters, which are, you can think of foodborne illnesses, technological malfunctions, a chemical spill. On the other hand, intentional human-generated disasters can include mass violence or any sort of intentional attacks. So, we also have complex emergencies. So complex emergencies encompass both natural and human-generated disasters, which involve many factors and have extreme consequences in many arenas of social and physical structure. For example, an earthquake, which is a natural disaster that causes damage to a nuclear power plant, which can result in long-term impacts to the surrounding community. This actually happened in Japan during a earthquake in March of 2011, where there was a earthquake and a tsunami and a nuclear disaster all in one. So what's a public health emergency? I'm sure all of us, or most of us, know what a public health emergency is, but once a public health emergency is declared, designated officials can really harness powers that are typically unavailable without legislative approval, by issuing emergency orders that can really help society cope with this public health emergency. So that's when an illness or health condition or an infectious agent poses a substantial risk to humans, by either causing a significant number of human fatalities or permanent or long-term disability. So these can include things such as the flu or influenza. And how you should react to a public health emergency will depend on the emergency itself. So remember, every situation is different, and different factors will impact the decisions made by officials. So remember, for more information about health preparedness and specific disease outbreaks, please visit your Department of Health's website or the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's website for specific guidance. And just to briefly give you an overview, I'm sure everyone in the room knows what a pandemic is, as we've been through living one for almost 2.5 years now. But it's the worldwide spread of a new disease. And health departments play a really important role, both at all levels, actually. And these departments protect the health of all Americans by providing essential human services, especially for those who are least able to help themselves. So what is emergency management? Emergency management is the organization and management of the resources and responsibilities for dealing with all humanitarian aspects of emergencies. So I like to think of emergency management as an orchestra. All of the different elements of an orchestra make beautiful music all on their own. So they're the string instruments, the brass, the winds, the percussion instruments, but everyone needs to work together to make this beautiful symphony. And emergency management agencies are similar to conductors, ensuring that each separate element is coordinating with one another and that we're all working from the same sheet of music. So what do emergency managers do? They apply science, technology, planning, and coordination to deal with extreme events that can harm a large number of people, damage property, or disrupt community life. So many of you as managers and supervisors can identify with this feeling that when things go well, you're not given the credit for it. And the mark of an effective business or organization is that you don't have to do everything by yourself. And this collaboration and behind the scenes work is exactly what emergency managers do before, during, and after an emergency event. So it's important to understand that emergency managers are there to coordinate response and recovery efforts, but disaster recovery requires members of the entire society to work towards a new normal. So everyone plays a part in making our community safer, which is why we say that first responders and emergency managers are really just one part of the emergency management team. And this is called the whole community approach. So just think about how many different public systems are affected. Let's say if a snowstorm were to hit during the week. And here are a few examples. So, schools may be closed. Think about what will parents do if they still need to go to work? How will they get childcare? The workplace or your office. Employees may not come to work because they'll be taking care of their families, or perhaps workplaces may not be able to open and thus will potentially lose profit or revenue. For your individual homes, the power could be out during a snowstorm. And think about how this can affect you. No heat, no way to cook food. Garage doors may not open. What about individuals who depend on, refrigerated medications? And then think about governing bodies. They have to clear the roads, restore power, assist people who need help. So remember that disasters can strike anywhere and at any time, natural or man-made. And all sectors of the community, as you can see on this slide, play an important and integral role. And I just want to emphasize that strengthening those existing local organizations and relationships and trust networks, really building upon what already works well in a community is the key to increasing community resilience. So let's take a close look at this sphere on this slide. I want to emphasize that disaster response is local and your sector spans across many of these circles, allowing you to be a resource in many ways. So some of you may be part of, non-governmental organizations or even at the local or tribal level. So to understand, this roles and responsibilities sphere, think about who responds first in an emergency. Individuals at the bottom, they are the true first responders. And when an individual or household can no longer deal with the situation, they look for help. And then this may be from neighbors, churches, local organizations, etc. So you keep moving on up this roles and responsibilities chart. This assistance chain goes all the way up to tribal or federal governments. And the next step of the sphere does not respond until it's beyond the capabilities of those before it to handle. So if neighborhoods cannot respond appropriately to a flood, they're going to ask for help by going to, nonprofits or maybe private sector organizations. If that exceeds their capability, they go on to the next. So I really like this sphere because it really gives us a better understanding of different roles and responsibilities of different sectors. So like I was saying, if a disaster is particularly damaging, then a major disaster declaration may be signed by the U.S. president. And to receive a major disaster declaration, the government must request one via the FEMA regional office and the FEMA office in Washington, D.C. And this request will then be reviewed to see if it meets statutory requirements and damage thresholds. And if so, the president will approve and sign a major disaster declaration. And after this disaster declaration has been signed, then FEMA will coordinate with the government to provide assistance to the affected area. So, just think how many different public systems are affected when a specific disaster occurs. Think about who is impacted most heavily. What would happen if the places that people turn to in times of need were not able to operate because they weren't prepared for the disaster? So on this slide, you can see just some examples of the various roles and responsibilities of various entities on different levels as reflected on the previous slide. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, but these are just some examples of different organizations or agencies that fall in the various sectors. So at the tribal, state, and federal government level, you have the CDC, local Department of Health, your emergency management agency. At the neighborhood level, there may be a church or faith-based organization, local library or school, your local government, so your local county emergency manager, the local fire or police department, etc. So moving on, what is the benefit of preparing yourself and your family? So ultimately, preparedness can save your life. If you're prepared for the unexpected, you'll be more calm and more confident on how to approach a situation. For example, if a fire occurs while you're at home, having working fire alarms, identified escape routes, an agreed upon meeting place for your family can really mean the difference between life and death. You could be on your own during a disaster. So, it's important to know that it takes first responders up to 72 hours to get to you when a major flood, snowstorm, or tornado or other disaster occurs. Because remember, first responders will be overwhelmed with calls and dealing with blocked roads or power outages, etc. So if you're prepared, you're going to ultimately be able to protect yourself and your loved ones. Another important thing is that if you're prepared, you'll be able to recover faster and more quickly after the disaster occurs. So remember, the more prepared you are, then the more you minimize your hardship when something does actually happen. You know, for example, if your basement floods, you could lose whatever important items you have down there, including important identification paperwork, maybe financial documents, or family photos. Making a plan in advance to keep these items safe makes the recovery process a lot easier. So that might include making having a waterproof box and putting all of those important paperwork in there, making digital copies of photos, you know, and remember, it makes it easier to file for insurance and not go through the emotional pain of losing irreplaceable items as well. And last but not least, if you and your family are prepared, then you'll be able to come to work and help others who have been impacted by the event. So, you know, your clients, your staff, you know, they may still need to work during a disaster. So it's important for your organization to be up and running as quickly as possible after a disaster. So I like to use this airline philosophy. You need to put your own mask on first before you help the person next to you. Otherwise, you may pass out and not be able to help the person next to you, whether that's your parent, you know, your child, whomever. And then, you know, you as individuals will be your community's first line of defense, and it's important to take action to prepare yourself and your families. And if you're prepared, then you'll also be equipped to be of service to your community after disaster. And remember, it takes an entire community to respond, and your facility or your program is part of that. And the sooner you can be back at work, that means the sooner, you know, everyone is able to be part of a functioning society as well. So on this slide, you can see some important questions that you can discuss with your staff and coworkers in the future to generate a conversation about preparedness. So we encourage you to share your experiences in dealing with disasters or emergencies and discuss what sort of information would be useful to you, your staff, and your clients going forward. So some things to talk about might be, do you feel prepared at home? Or how prepared do you feel at work? How can we help make our environment at work feel more safe? Or how can we provide trainings or information to you that might be useful? As well as, does anyone have any specific experience that may be beneficial when a disaster occurs? So talking to everyone and seeing what kind of trainings or assets that they have. So is someone certified in CPR? Does someone know how to use a fire extinguisher? These are important things to, you know, discuss with your staff, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about organizational preparedness. So making a plan. Why is making a plan important? Communication networks such as your cell phone and computers could be unreliable during a disaster, and electricity could be disrupted. Planning in advance will help ensure that all members, including children and individuals with disabilities, as well as outside caregivers, you know how to reach one another and where to meet up in an emergency. So when creating your family communications plan, some things to consider are, how might you assign roles and responsibilities? How will you talk about this plan with others in your life? You know, why is having a contact card important? Why is an out of area contact important? Who are my backup contacts? You know, who could use this? What are some situations where a plan would be important to have? So, you know, FEMA has actually made it pretty simple for individuals to make a family emergency plan. We have our emergency communications plan, which is available to download for free online if you visit ready.gov. This plan is an easy to use template and a checklist, ideally, and it goes through what you should do and talk about when making your family communications plan, including identifying emergency meeting places, writing down medical information, and how often to practice your plans. And as a community resource and service provider, it's important for you and others in your program to always remain aware of any local alerts and warnings. But remaining aware of alerts and warnings is also crucial to keeping you and your family safe. So there are several public information and warning systems in place that may be activated in case of an emergency or threat. And these may be communicated to the public through radio and news alerts, even text messages or sirens. But there are also additional alert systems you can sign up for, such as county and organization specific alerts. FEMA, the Red Cross, the Weather Channel, along with many other, local news stations have their own apps. So you can download these apps and specify your location to receive real-time alerts and warnings pertaining to your specific geographic area. And many local news stations have also have their own apps, like I mentioned. So ABC, NBC, CBS. So consider signing up for their notifications as well. And FEMA's app actually just got a pretty new update, so I would encourage you to check that out, and that's definitely a free resource for you as well. So moving on, just to go over this briefly, planning and evacuating. So, take some time to think about your home's evacuation plan or even your workplace. When drawing your evacuation plans, it's important to have 2 places to go, one primary and one backup. So when would you need these evacuation routes? In a fire, a flood? So, identify what route you would take to get there. And you can see a sample evacuation plan that's drawn on a simple pen and paper on the right side. So, some important things to include in your diagram are, special consideration. So is someone in your home, wheelchair bound? Do you need to find a route that is accessible for them? How will you share this evacuation route with your household? How can you practice this evacuation? And remember, disasters don't wait for it to be convenient for you. If it's raining, we are training. That's a nice slogan that we like to say. And then additionally, it's great to have an emergency supply kit. An emergency supply kit could be at your home, in your car, in your workplace. And, things that typically go in a disaster kit include water for a few days, food, comfort items. So remember, kits don't have to be scary. Include comfort items for children, such as games, books, puzzles, a teddy bear or stuffed animal. It's important to have some cash on hand if that's possible. Any sort of medication that you or someone in your home might depend on, a flashlight, a hand crank radio, a whistle to signal for help, an extra pair of clothes, etc. And this is just a practical suggestion. Many of us don't necessarily have our emergency kits, ready to go. I myself need to update the kit that's in my car. But remember, your disaster kit can be slowly built. Try to get one thing each month. And remember, kits are custom to meet your own needs. So I know pre-made emergency kits can be really expensive. Encourage individuals to make their own kits. You can visit the local Dollar General or Dollar Tree, or just start off by making a dollar store disaster kit. And that's definitely effective. And obviously, we want to include some sort of personal PPEs like masks as well in our kits as well as we navigate through public health emergencies. And then don't forget to include items for individuals that require special needs or attention, such as pregnant women, children or infants, elders, individuals with access or medical needs, pets, or individuals with limited English proficiency. Remember, they may need additional items when an emergency occurs, including prescriptions, important medical information if they have severe allergies or health conditions. Infants may need extra formula and diapers. Include a child's favorite toy or comfort items. Include gloves, potentially, hand sanitizer, like I mentioned, personal protective equipment. And, for families, it's very important to pack a kit that accommodates everyone. And on this slide, here are just some additional general home safety tips to discuss with your family, your coworkers, your clients. Be sure to install smoke, carbon monoxide, and natural gas alarms and test them monthly. Make sure those batteries do not have to be replaced. Test those smoke alarms regularly. Try to eliminate any sort of common electrical or fire hazards around your house, such as loose wiring. Check your fire extinguishers, and lastly, know how to turn off your utilities like natural gas in your home. And financial preparedness. So It's important to know that Americans at all income levels have experienced the challenge of rebuilding their lives after a disaster or emergency. And in these stressful times, having access to personal financial insurance, medical and other important records is critical for starting the recovery process quickly and efficiently. So the best way to plan for unexpected expenses that may result after a natural disaster is to start saving if possible. And putting away a small part of your income or paycheck can help you and your family avoid taking on more debt to respond to the costs of rebuilding your life after an emergency. And if individuals do not have the financial means to start saving today, we do encourage specific actions that everyone can take to be more financially resilient, such as gathering and having those physical copies of important financial documents, such as mortgage statements, your apartment lease. Consider uploading paper copies online and having those electronic copies readily available, like bank statements, having your bank account number, on a physical piece of paper. If you have homeowners or rental insurance, we encourage individuals to be up to date and review your policies to ensure that your policies are still accurate and current, and make sure the coverage on your insurance is enough to support you in an emergency. I can give a personal example. I did not check my homeowner's insurance, and I got a letter in the mail saying that my insurance policy had to be updated because the cost of inflation and the cost of construction rising. So my current coverage was not enough. So, be sure to to check if your insurance, not only for your home, but for your workplace is enough to cover, reconstruction costs. And consider taking pictures of all your valuables and furniture beforehand. So when something does happen, it's easier when you claim your insurance. And for individuals who haven't really considered getting their important documents in one place or organized, or if you think that's really overwhelming, FEMA has a great publication called the Emergency Financial First Aid Kit, as you can see on this slide. This guide can help people prepare financially and provides a step-by-step process to help reduce the financial impact of disasters. So it's a really nice, easy to follow booklet that helps you become more financially prepared prior to a natural disaster or emergency. And this is available for free online. And moving on, it's important to realize that, it's important to cope with emergencies and disasters appropriately and take care of our mental and emotional well-being as well. So disasters are upsetting experiences for everyone involved, whether you're a victim or not. And during and after disaster, it's natural to experience different and strong emotions. So coping with these feelings and getting help when you need it will help you, your family, and your community recover from a disaster. Being more emotionally and socially resilient. So connect with family, friends, and others in your community. Take care of yourself and each other and know when and how to seek help. And especially for individuals on this call who might always be on the front line. And always remember, please seek immediate help if you or someone you know is feeling that, life is not worth living, or if you're having thoughts of harming yourself or others. You can also contact the disaster distress hotline as well. And remember that mental health plays an important role in physical health, behavior, and long-term quality of life. So it's important to keep children both physically and mentally safe during and after a disaster. So on this slide are a list of resources that parents or guardians, as well as staff, can use to help children cope after a disaster. And this is a helpful resource for employees as well, who may have children or who are caring for youth as well. So does anyone have any questions about personal preparedness before we move on to our next section, which is community preparedness? Feel free to place any questions in the chat or use the raised hand function if you have any questions about personal preparedness. All right, looks like we don't have any questions, but remember, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll be sure to answer those promptly. But Moving on, I'll actually go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Sarah, who will talk about community preparedness and the importance of community building in the context of community planning and natural disasters. So, Sarah?
Thank you, Sumayya. So now we're going to talk about community preparedness. Community preparedness is really preparing each individual piece or asset within your tribal nation to lead a more prepared whole community. Sumayya talked with us about the whole community preparedness approach, and it's really important to think of a community as a single living organism. All facets of it need to work together, be on the same page, and be equally prepared to respond to any stresses on the community effectively. Outcomes of community preparedness are really reducing loss of life and property, building resilience within your tribe and your surrounding community. Strong elements lead to a stronger whole. So what are some specific examples of tribal or other community partners that you regularly work with? And it doesn't have to be disaster related, but like what does your network look like professionally? Who do you work with in the community? All right, I'm going to let you guys continue to think about that. But really leveraging your community assets can help you solve challenges. And we're going to continue to talk about this in this next section, which can make your neighborhood a safer and better place to live. Building community relationships really can help you build a preparedness picture and help build a stronger and more resilient community. So as you think about the hexagon that we have on the slide here, these are some of the people in the community that help create preparedness, right? From education to the library to different nonprofits that might exist either within your tribal nation or surrounding communities. Head Start is something that we have traditionally worked with, particularly working with Marc and his team at the Administration for Children and Families. I love that. Drone imagery for damage evaluation. That's a really strong asset, right? When you have damage, being able to really get places that you might not be able to get to without a drone and getting a bigger picture faster. I think that's a really smart asset. Community resilience. Resilience, I think, has been a very important word that we hear a lot of people using over the years, and I think that it's something that everyone has been revisiting in many ways. And so I think it's really important that we always define resilience when we talk about it. And so the ability for community resilience is really the ability for a community to quickly bounce back or at least get on its feet after a disaster occurs. So one of the examples I really like when talking about resiliency is a well-built boat. In a storm, a boat has to have the ability, right, to sway and take on water. If the boat is too rigid or it isn't constructed to weather the storm, it's going to sink. And if it's crafted with the elements in mind to take on some degree of damage during the storm, it may float a little lower for a while, but eventually that boat with some support and maybe a bucket to help get out the extra water, it's going to make it through, most likely with a few scratches and a story to tell, but that boat is going to come out on the other side. And so when I think about a community and resiliency, I do like to think about, what a well-constructed boat does look like. And so we really are talking about our ability to get back into working order after a disaster occurs. This is really a big picture concept. We're thinking about financial, physical, environmental, emotional, and importantly, spiritual. In communities, spirituality takes many different forms. And I think that it's really important when we think about resiliency to also include spirituality and thinking about how are we going to, when we're going through recovery, how are we going to connect back into that and really, use what people in our community find important and special to them. And how is trust generated within your tribal community or surrounding communities? I'll take hands, I'll take chat answers, I'll keep going. For me, trust always comes down to relationships. Knowing who is going to pick up the phone when they're needed, knowing who is going to go check on their neighbors, right? I think that trust is really everything comes back to relationships and taking that extra time to know someone, to understand what is important to them personally or important to their organization or who they're representing. Neighborhood associations are also a really great way to build trust. Parent-teacher associations, right? The children's teachers often, will know more about families and maybe needs that they have. Libraries and houses of worship are also great ways to garner trust. And really, it comes down to neighbors knowing neighbors. The more we know each other, the more likely we're going to help each other in a disaster. And that really brings us to the importance of building relationships, like I mentioned earlier. That really is, to me, how a community builds trust and ultimately builds community resilience. Your organization, they'll probably be different. And so it's really important to know how it meets the unique needs of community members every day. During an emergency or a disaster, your ability to meet those needs as well as maintain your clientele who may be affected. So when we start talking more about organizational preparedness, it's going to be really, really important to talk about, right? How do you keep providing those important services that you provide to your community after a disaster? And Sumayya is going to really get into that. And that's one of the things that we find to be vitally important. Do any of these questions resonate with anyone? I really like you guys are definitely about the tight-knit community, neighbors helping neighbors. It's a hand up, right? I mean, that's what resilience is really all about, is lifting each other up. Well, I think it's really important to keep in mind again what community resources may be available to you during a disaster and calling on those resources. I think it's really important that, again, when we need help, we're willing to make that phone call and ask that neighbor. Or one of the things that I was able to do is I actually deployed a few years ago up to the Bad River Band tribe and spent a lot of time working with their social services director up there. And one of the things that I learned was they got a lot of support from neighboring tribes, and they didn't even have to pick up the phone, right? People knew what they needed and started bringing it. And I think it was just really excellent. And to see how, again, trust and community is not only built right geographically, but it's built with this network. And so I'm also really happy to see this Partners in Action conference going on over several days, because I'm sure you guys are seeing lots of really cool conversations happening and also thinking about how we can be more resilient. Community mapping. I think this is something that I hadn't given a lot of thought about before I joined FEMA and before I started doing a lot of preparedness work. But community mapping is a method and a process to identify strengths, resources, assets, and vulnerabilities within your community. This process allows you to see what challenges and vulnerabilities exist at every level. You can identify strengths and resources and assets like drone support. Um, Also think about houses of worship. Could they be used as a shelter? Where could you shelter people should they need it? Where would food distribution make a lot of sense in your community? Who are those trusted pillars as well within your tribal nation? I think people go to where they know that they can get resources and support in time of need. From this, the community can also identify challenges and vulnerabilities that exist within the community. Why is this helpful? It helps us work together. It makes communication easier. It helps you know what's out there. And it also is important, you're going to know who needs more help and you're going to know who can be a helper. Those two things and being able to match them up is so vital in a disaster. And it's also going to make your plans more effective because people are going to be bought into them as opposed to them sitting on the shelf, right? They've already started having those conversations. They know what their role is and they're going to jump into action. And also, you know your community. You live there, you work there, you send your children to school there, you take care of your family there, you take care of your parents there. So that's why community mapping is really genuinely important. And when I say resources, what am I talking about? What sort of facility or function or characteristic might serve as a resource for your community in emergency planning or emergency response? Schools, houses of worship, police, fire, nonprofits. Are there any conference or convention centers nearby? Is there somebody that holds a summer camp nearby? What hospitals, what factories, what businesses are in the area? What kind of resources you think about might not be on a map? Right? So what would be important in community mapping that you're not going to find on a map? I know for me, I would want to know, like, is my neighbor a doctor or a veterinarian? Like, that's a really easy resource sometimes to tap into. And as Sumayya talked about that layered effect, right, of support, it's important to know who's around, what their skills and expertise is. Yes, businesses with generators and a large freezer. That's really important. Who has chainsaws and training? That's super important as well. That is one of those things where you need to clear roads, you need to clear property, you need to make things accessible. And so it's really good to know who are those people, like we said, could spring into action. What about assets? I know somebody mentioned a drone earlier. I think that's really cool. An asset really is something that's useful, a valuable thing or a valuable person or quality is really defined in an asset. And one of the things that I learned, again, I told you guys that I spent a little bit of time up at Bad River, and I got to spend some time with their tribal historian who taught me a lot about how they've had to move things on the reservation because of flooding. And we were able to build a lot of that into our damage assessment that we were doing. And she was such an asset in a way that you might not have been like, oh, she's one of the first people you need to talk to. And so she was able to really help us understand, again, what the community was that we were supporting. And how does this all relate back to disaster? Again, you've got to leverage those resources. You've got to support those resources and have those organizations and resources available to continue to support the community in times of disaster. So we really want to know, again, what the places are, what the characteristics are of the areas, what might make those places vulnerable in an emergency. Is the closest house of worship or food bank near somewhere that's prone to flooding? Is that going to cause an issue in your community should you have a flood and that's a place where people turn to? Is the child care center located somewhere that might be vulnerable near a levee, a dam, a nuclear power plant, railroad lines, where there's large populations of maybe people who have access and functional needs? And then also keeping in mind other social issues within the community, whether there are some issues with crime or violence or substance abuse, really knowing again what you can see on the map, but then also what you can't see on the map. Those pieces are really important when we talk about mapping. We can work together. You can work together with others from your facility to identify resources and potential vulnerabilities within your geographic radius. You can identify your facility on Google Maps. You can use the map as a tool to answer some of those prompts above. So you can actually use Google Maps as an asset or a resource when you're doing community mapping. And we are making these slides available. So if anybody needs to refer back to some of the things that Sumayya and I have been talking about, our slides will be available. We're also available to you as well if you have any follow-up questions or want to talk anything through. All right, on to some of my favorite stuff is getting involved, right? So there's different ways that you may already be involved in your community, and then there might be other things that you could bring to your tribal nation or community to help strengthen or support what preparedness looks like. So community emergency response teams are locally implemented programs that teach people how to be better prepared for hazards that may impact their community. It's going to train people in basic disaster response skills such as fire safety, light search and rescue, team organization, disaster medical operations. There are now CERT programs in several tribal nations. I do not believe that we have any in Region 5. If we do, please let me know because I want you on our list of CERT coordinators. And then they're also across the US territories in the 50 states. Each community and each CERT really is unique, and they're all essential to building a culture of preparedness. There are over 2,700 local CERT programs, and more than 600,000 people have actually been trained in CERT. Local CERT programs, like I said earlier a little bit, how do we start one? Maggie, we would love to talk to you about that. We're actually going to get to that on the next slide, so I'm glad you asked. They train people to organize volunteers to safely assist families, neighbors, and coworkers and other community members during emergencies when professional responders may not be available immediately to provide assistance. During disasters, CERT volunteer teams perform basic CERT response activities. It might be checking in on neighbors like we talked about earlier, following an incident to make sure that they're okay. Distributing information to the public. A lot of CERT volunteers, honestly, they use their social media, they talk to their friends, they share flyers, they just are very dialed in, right, to what's going on and are able to share that information out because we're all amplifiers. They also often support emergency operations centers. And then volunteers can support their community by organizing, promoting, and participating in emergency preparedness events, activities, or projects. So getting to your question, if you're interested in CERT, or you also want to make sure that young people are represented in CERT, because we not only have CERT, but we also have teen CERT, campus CERT, different levels of CERT. I will say all the training is very similar. But you can get started with the materials that we have on this slide. You can also reach out to Sumayya and I'll make sure, I think Sumayya has our email at the end, so you can reach us. But one of the best places to start is on the FEMA Education Independent Study website is our Independent Study 317 class, and that's at the bottom of the slide. So there's going to be a little bit of information on starting a CERT, and like I said, we're happy to help you and make sure you get your questions answered on that. The next piece when we talk about community and citizen responder training is our free training, which is, and CERT is also free, but You Are the Help Until Help Arrives, which is available online. You can take it online at your own pace. The overall goal of this course is to teach participants basic skills to keep people with life-threatening injuries alive until professionals can help. By participating in this program, you can either do it online or in person. Participants will be able to learn how they can help take some basic life-saving steps and skills to teach their community these steps until help arrives. So if you want to talk more about CERT, or if you want to talk more about You Are the Help Until Help Arrives, please feel free to reach out to myself and Sumayya. We're scheduling a You Are the Help Until Help Arrives virtually in September. And then we also do them throughout the year. But we could also look into supporting something in person. It's really going to depend on scheduling and availability and making sure that we have somebody local who could help do that training. And one of the things that we also like to do when we do a You Are the Help Until Help Arrives training is we like to also include a partner who is a medical professional. Sumayya and I are not medical professionals. We have the level of knowledge that we've been trained, and so we also like to have someone join us who has kind of a more in-depth level of knowledge, because we find that people have really interesting and very serious questions when we teach a class like this, and so we want to make sure that we're able to answer those questions. So, in summary, prepare yourself to assist preparing the whole community. We're all members of the same team. We all have a stake in keeping our community safe during disasters or emergencies. Know your assets. Identify what the challenges and vulnerabilities are. Call on your resources that can be critical for life-saving support following a disaster. Again, those challenges and vulnerabilities you know that you could face, you can address some of those before a disaster occurs. So that really helps build resiliency both for yourself and for your community. Continue to build those relationships and establish trust and social capital. Having social capital in your community really does make the difference when it comes to resilience. And the other thing I also want to mention is all of these personal preparedness slides, any of the organizational preparedness slides, if you want to utilize these, please utilize these. Help teach and train people in your community to be more prepared, be more resilient. We will be sharing them. You can make them your own. Obviously, you can't represent FEMA unless you're a employee of FEMA, but we are happy to support and share any resources that we have. And now I'm going to turn it back to Sumayya to discuss our organizational preparedness. Thank you, Sumayya.
No problem. Thanks so much, Sarah. So now we're actually going to go right into the dense part of our presentation today, which is organizational preparedness, and how you all can take the information you learned today back to your staff, back to your workplace, and really work on those emergency operation plans and community building, as well as other ways that you can make your organization more prepared prior to a disaster occurring. So as we already know, with what has been going on over the past 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic, disasters strike in every corner of the world during every season and on different scales throughout the year. No matter if there is something else going on in the world, disasters are not going to stop and wait. These events are often unexpected by their very nature, leaving very little time, if any, to prepare. And that's why it's so important to put time into planning and preparation long before the disaster strikes. So you all learned a little bit about how to personally prepare yourself at home, as well as your family and loved ones, so that way you can not worry about what's going on at home, because you have that reassurance that everyone at home is safe. But now you can focus on putting that cap on and preparing your clients, as well as the individuals you serve. So as you all know, nonprofit organizations, social service agencies, community-based organizations, they serve as the key players during these specific disasters or emergencies. And, they provide the aid and resources to those affected or the victims. And as you already know, many people already rely on these everyday services during, quote, normal times, so when there's not an emergency going on. So just imagine when emergencies do occur, organizations can see a huge surge of the need during and after the event. What comes to mind for me are hospitals. Hospitals every day, beds are filled. But when COVID happened, the capacity of the hospitals exceeded the ability because of the demand for, taking care of individuals with COVID-19 versus other individuals who just needed to go to the hospital for everyday or other medical emergencies or needs. So, overall, effective organizational planning and preparedness helps alleviate some of the chaos and some of the challenges produced by the unexpected crises that we may face, when it comes to natural and man-made disasters or public health emergencies. So overall, if your organization is prepared, as you can see on this slide, you'll be able to ensure that your staff and your clients and the people that you serve are safe. You'll be able to ensure that operations are able to continue normally and efficiently. It's going to help you save money from unexpected costs or unexpected emergencies because they were accounted for ahead of time. Ultimately, you'll be able to provide help during critical times to your clients and community, in the communities you serve, instead of managing to survive yourself. Because like I mentioned, you already understand the importance of being personally prepared. And ultimately, if your organization is prepared, you're going to be able to help save lives. So we're actually going to walk through some of the items that you might want to incorporate into a emergency operation plan. So in the chat, how many of you have seen your organization's emergency operation plan, or does your organization have one? If you are part of a school, a child care facility, any sort of entity, a nonprofit, let us know if you've seen the emergency operation plan, or if you've ever been part of the process. Feel free to share your feedback on that. But as always, we want to emphasize that you know what's best and what sort of materials will be most helpful and pertinent to your program and staff. So we want to avoid all of these tools just really piling up and adding to like the chaos of paperwork and all of the extra stuff that kind of just sits on your shelf. So, there's a lot of information and requirements, to sort through when you think about emergency operation plans. But actually, we're going to just focus on some of the important and basic pieces that are integral to a good emergency operations plan. So while you've probably seen them before, we hope that as a group together today, we can share and learn some strategies and tips about really operationalizing what is on paper. So throughout my last portion, feel free to share your feedback and best practices in the chat, just for the sake of sharing best practices with one another. So it's important to know that your plans will be living, breathing, active documents that will change and grow as you continue to practice emergency planning and preparedness activities. So with all of the tools and resources that we're going to talk about, and as you look at various other topics in the future, we hope you can take an all hazards approach to planning. Essentially, an all hazards approach means that the plans you create will be applicable and helpful no matter what the situation arises. From a flooding to fire to flu, the basic process for handling an emergency should be the same. Having a flexible framework like this will help you and everyone else feel more comfortable and responding to any situation. And additionally, with all the planning, we want you to really keep special needs populations in mind, whether it's elderly individuals, children, staff. We know that these folks are more challenging to accommodate and require some extra thought and are most typically left out of the conversation. And in order to have a plan that really works and caters to those who will most need the help and support, really think through how to incorporate, functional and access needs, mobility, emotional resources, mental health, etc., and all of these differences into your plans. So now we're actually going to walk through the step-by-step process of creating an emergency operations plan. This is no means the official way of creating an EOP, but this is a recommended process. So a comprehensive plan needs to address the different needs of, the staff or the clients to ensure everyone is protected. And no matter the size of your facility, someone is relying on your services. And if an emergency impacts your site or your facility, your plan needs to include ways to recover quickly. So this is a step-by-step process and in formulating an emergency operations plan. So the first step is forming a collaborative team. Think about who will be the core constructors of your plan. Make sure there is a common framework in place, as well as be sure to define and delegate responsibilities. Next up is understanding the situation. We'll talk a little bit about determining goals and objectives. Step 4 is actually creating those plans. Taking that all hazards approach and developing those plans and creating the framework. Step 5 is going to be plan, preparation, review, and approval. So actually assessing the plan and collaborating with your staff to review the plan and approve it. And last but not least, plan implementation and maintenance, which is essentially practicing your plans. Remember, it's a living document, and it's very important not to skip steps as we go. It may seem easier to form a team than immediately start making a plan. But in order for your plan to be as effective as possible, each of these steps should be taken taken in order. So step 1 is forming a collaborative working team. So operational planning is best performed by a team. So it's important to identify your core planning team. And you can see some of who can be part of your collaborative working team on this slide. So to put together an effective and comprehensive plan, members of your community or your organization bring specific skills and expertise. Get input from emergency management officials, first responders, local businesses, organizations, that community networks that we talked about a little bit earlier. And in addition, members of the planning team should be able to understand and accept the roles of other departments and agencies. So remember, it's important to, when having a planning team, to build and expand those relationships that really bring your plan to be creative and innovative. And, having this innovative approach helps establish a planning routine. So, remember, your emergency operation plan outlines responsibilities. And to ensure overall plan effectiveness, it's crucial to have representation or feedback from all members of your community, either by participating on the planning team or not, or providing just feedback. Next up is understanding the situation when it comes to making your emergency operation plans. So there are many types of emergencies, and in some situations, you may need to evacuate, like a fire. However, there are other emergencies when you have to shelter in place, like a tornado, or severe weather, like a severe lightning or thunderstorm. Or maybe you will have to have a lockdown, for example, a danger in your neighborhood, such as an active shooter. So remember, effective risk management depends on a consistent comparison of different hazards a particular community faces. So this is typically performed through that hazard identification process. We'll talk a little bit about this next. But remember, identify the hazards and risks in your community that are most likely to happen. And remember, your planning team knows those risks and will be able to share, risks that have occurred or could potentially occur. And remember, when you're talking about those risks, like an active shooter, a fire, a tornado, a flood, remember that each hazard will require special attention and planning. And then remember, consider the frequency of the hazard or the likelihood. Think about how prone is flooding in your community. How often does that happen? Is it high risk, a medium risk, or low risk? Think about violence and all of those other things as well. Moving on is determining goals and objectives. So remember, goals are broad general statements that indicate a solution to a problem, while as objectives are more specific and identifiable in terms of actions carried out. So for example, your operational priority might be to protect the staff and children from a tornado and storm surge. However, the overarching goal will be, practicing evacuations, And then another thing is completing a evacuation at least 2 hours before arrival of a tornado. That's another example of a specific objective. Moving on, developing your plans. So remember, when you're developing your plans, try to stick to an established timeline to ensure completion of your plan. As well as when you're creating your plans, compare and select possible solutions for achieving specific safety goals and objectives that your team has identified. And then last but not least, make sure you identify resources to help your program's emergency operations plan. You may think that your organization is capable of handling everything independently, but don't forget to include those community assets in your emergency operations plans. If there's a doctor in your neighborhood, if you're aware that a staff member has a specific training, think about your evacuation location. If your organization is near a local library or near a food pantry, that could be the evacuation place to meet. So think about those resources within your community when making your emergency operations plan and while you're developing those plans. The next step is planning, reviewing, and revising, and actually getting them approved. So, this step turns the results of course of action into the development of an official plan. So this step really requires you to have a rough draft actually starting to create that official document for the basic emergency operations plan. So when you're creating your plan, formally create a physical or electronic copy using a template. And this is a perfect segue. We're going to actually talk a little bit about this next, where Marc will talk about his resource, which is an EOP template that you can use. Next is reviewing your plans. So check the written plan and its conformity to any sort of regulation requirements. So if your agency gets specific funding from different entities, and having an emergency operations plan is one requirement, make sure it adheres to any sort of requirements or regulations. I know Head Start associations must meet specific regulations, and I'm sure other organizations as well have a similar process. And lastly, getting it approved. Make sure that your program's emergency plans are approved and are meeting its regulations, whether that's getting it approved by your local emergency manager, if it has to get approved by the the CEO of the organization or the director. So just make sure when you have a formal document in place, getting those approved. Last but not least is plan implementation and maintenance. So, make sure you practice any sort of, drills that you have identified. Practice those emergency procedures, because obviously you can create a plan, but you're not going to know if it's effective unless you practice it. Make sure you review the plan. Some questions to consider while you're reviewing your plans are, were children or staff accounted for quickly? Were individuals with healthcare needs accommodated for? Did everyone follow the practice procedure? What went well? What did not go well? And take that feedback and revise your plans. And remember, during the revision process, directors, staff, family, community members can update and revise the emergency plan and procedures together based on lessons learned from a drill or a review process. And if revisions are made, make sure you communicate updates to everyone involved, including staff, families, emergency contacts, community partners. Think about uploading the emergency plan on a shared drive that all employees can access it. Maybe having it in a designated location so it's easily accessible. So on this slide, you can see just some additional tips for creating a effective emergency operations plan. Make sure you keep the language simple and clear. So make sure you summarize important information with checklists. Any sort of visual maps and flowcharts might be helpful. Try to avoid using jargon. I use the term EOP a lot. That is jargon, emergency management jargon. So not many individuals will know what an EOP is. So maybe say emergency plan, or use universal language and minimize the use of acronyms so everyone is on the same page. Try to use short sentences and active voice so everyone can comprehend the plan, including volunteers. And try to format the plan and present its contents in a way that readers can quickly find the solutions and options. You don't want to make it a complicated document, especially when it needs to be used during times of crisis. And make sure the document is accessible by developing tools and documents so that they can be easily converted to alternate formats. So if you have a printed document, make sure it's easily able to be uploaded online, having a video, just making it universally accessible. So communication is also integral when it comes to emergency preparedness and emergency operations planning. So be sure your plan includes steps and guidance to keep families appropriately informed and emergency contacts for staff. Preparing for how you'll communicate with families and staff members during all types of emergencies is important. So remember, cell phones can fail. Have a backup plan for communication methods. So, families and staff members in your facility or program without access to basic technology may be at risk for not receiving needed services. They might be socially isolated and at risk for other things as well. So just remember that, plan for alternative ways to reach out to families. Think about, does your organization participate in a texting program where individuals can get text alerts in real time? And remember that equipment needs to be different depending on the type of emergency. So you can think about social media playing a good tool as well when an emergency occurs. remember that, different emergencies, like I said, require different responses. So these are just some questions to consider. Will you send an all clear message? Do you use any sort of color codes when an emergency happens? I know hospitals often use code names to alert their staff for a specific event. Codes allow staff and personnel to respond quickly and appropriately without scaring individuals or just customers or clients. And the use of codes can prevent panic as well by any sort of visitors or children. And think about reunification procedures. If you are a child care organization or you are part of an organization that deals with younger children or works with youth or infants, think about or even older adults, how will those individuals be reunified with their families? So it's important for you all to have procedures in place if children or elders or patients cannot be immediately reunited with their families, and making sure you have those up-to-date contact informations for everyone. So do you have a plan in place where those contact information has to be reviewed and updated quarterly or annually, just to make sure you don't have a phone number that hasn't been touched in years? And just remember, health outbreaks and pandemics. So the U.S. has a long history of fighting pandemics, from Spanish influenza, HIV and AIDS, and more recently to COVID-19. So just make sure that, communicate regularly with local public health experts to gauge community control measures when it comes to, health preparedness. And make sure you revise those existing policies and services to children and families as well. And just make sure that everyone is following and up to date on any sort of health guidance. And encourage, staff and caregivers, teachers, and so on to be up to date on those immunizations as well, following any sort of guidelines. And here are just some additional training and information to give to staff. So hand washing, properly coughing and sneezing etiquette, social distancing guidance, etc. The use of face shields and masks when appropriate. And on this slide, you can see just some additional mental health resources as well for supporting families and staff. And then I'll just briefly go over what is risk assessment. So obviously, when we start those emergency operations plans, we want to identify those risks. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but think about what are some events that are very likely to happen but have minimal impact, or what are some events that are going to happen that have a high impact. This is a nice matrix to use when you are creating those emergency plans. So think about, your facility's location near railroad tracks. Is it near a flood zone, a violent neighborhood? Are you sharing a shared space with another organization? Think about your technological needs, computer systems, etc. And remember, who can help you identify those risks? Insurance carrier, parents, your utility company personnel, local businesses, your emergency manager, first responders, Department of Health. These are all important individuals that can help you become more aware of the hazards that are part of your community, and try to include community members from all various sectors, because they have access to information and subject matter expertise that we might not necessarily have, and they can bring a lot of valuable information to your plan. So remember, when you make your emergency operation plan, and feel free to talk about this in the chat or just give your feedback. What are some specific hazards that are within your community or organization? Is it near a railroad track? Is it near a river? Those are just some things to consider. And remember that mitigation is, the effort to reduce loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters. So mitigation is done before an incident happens to reduce its effects. So remember, insurance is a great mitigation effort as well. Making sure that we understand the risks and address them and invest in long-term well-being as well. So, some examples of mitigation actions can include protecting your physical space, making structural upgrades as well. Consider reevaluating your insurance needs and making your policies are up to date. Think about how to fund those operations during incidents and, creating an emergency reserve fund. So these are just some mitigation actions that you can take, at your site or facility. And for individuals that serve youth or children, try securing, large pieces of furniture, as well to to avoid the risk of any sort of, hazard within the center or within the facility. Make sure that your, plumbing and electricity is up to date so that when something does happen, there is not any sort of electrical hazard. So these are just some examples. All right, so moving on, we might not necessarily have time to do this large group activity, but let's see, what time is it actually? Oh, we do have time. It's only, all right, perfect. So I want you all to take a look at this picture right here. So this is actually an activity taken from our open training, which is organizations preparing for emergency needs. It's a relevantly new FEMA training. So I want you all to take a look at this graphic and see what are some risks or hazards at this facility. So this could be a hospital, this could be an office, whatever you think it could be. But in the chat, just give some examples of the hazards nearby. So for example, I see that there are a lot of trees surrounding the building. This may be a hazard when there is severe weather or a tornado. So feel free to, place some of the hazards in the chat, and then I'll go over the answer key in the next minute or so. So I see someone said river flooding. Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Anyone else? I see a lot of hazards actually. So there's cars here. There's a balcony. There's a lot of stuff on the roof. A very remote location. Excellent. Yes, that is true. Anyone else want to share what they see? Yep, garbage in the back being obstructed. Excellent. I also see that there's some sort of propane tank over here. Is that safe? Yep, one way in and one way out. Excellent. That is definitely true. I see that there's a lot of panels and satellites on the roof. That might be a hazard. This balcony. Yep, the top of the building. Gas is unsecured by little storage. Excellent. These are all great answers. So this just shows that some of you may have taken a look at this image and just assume that there might not necessarily be any sort of imminent threats or hazards, but there's actually 10 different hazards that could be identified. And some of you actually identified more than one hazard. But remember, this facility is near a river, so reevaluating flood insurance policies is important. Also, securing or reinforcing windows and doors. You can also think about sealing and securing the roof and making sure it's in good condition. Ensuring that trimming the trees are trimmed and any sort of obstructive trees are removed. Storing flammable materials in a secure place. Removing any sort of debris. Checking and cleaning the drain system. Securing outdoor furniture, tools, and equipment. So these are all different hazards identified in this picture. And if you thought this activity was fun, I encourage you all to check out FEMA's open training as well. So you can just go to FEMA, you can search FEMA open training online. But anyways, moving on. So now that you've taken some time to really look at what risk assessment is, with this activity and what I shared with you all. So I encourage you to go back to your business, to your child care center, your nonprofit, or your agency and discuss these questions with your team that are on this slide. For example, how might you mitigate some of the risks? What can you do to lessen their impact or speed the recovery process after something happens? And again, this will all be available to you to reference after today's presentation. And just last but not least, practicing your plans. So, make sure that, if it's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, practice your plans that will limit any sort of problems that might occur later. And, think about what kind of drills should you do? What information will you need? Who should be invited when practicing those plans? How will you be able to measure success? And how can you think outside of the box to help staff react in the best way possible during an actual event? And I like to think that, fire drills. We've practiced that so much. I know I have when I was younger, that every time I hear a fire alarm go off, I'm automatically in that process, like robotically just get up, find my nearest stairway and just evacuate, leave everything behind. So, practicing those plans and making it, a natural process is the best way possible, just to make sure that everyone is on track to stay safe. So again, on this slide, just some additional questions to consider. Just remember, maintaining those plans and practicing them are very important, and always, always, always communicate any sort of changes to your plan with staff and families and community partners. And remember, does your emergency plan address emergency supplies, roles and responsibilities for staff members, emergency contacts, mental health resources, family reunification, continuity of service? Think about staff training in CPR, first aid, and just make sure that the plans in place are for continuing to, that plans are in place for continuing to operate when an emergency or disaster does occur. And remember, we tend to make the assumption about how individuals behave after a disaster occurs. So we expect that people will remain calm, rational, will follow directions, and that they'll help one another. But, the actual reality is that, they're not going to act responsibly if they're not prepared. It's going to be chaotic. So the likely reaction is that people will not know how to evacuate. Roles and responsibilities will not be clear. They won't know how to assist individuals with special needs, and it's going to be confusing to, reunify elders or children. So that's why it's very, very important that we practice those plans, because that's going to be the likely reaction. And staff are going to be worried about their own families as opposed to what's going on in the workplace. So that's why emergency operation planning for organizations is very important. So thanks everyone for listening about the importance and learning about organizational preparedness. These are just some additional resources for you. We have the FEMA IS-36 child care planning. This is a great resource as well. We have CPG 101, the FEMA's comprehensive preparedness guide. It provides guidance on emergency operations planning for FEMA. It's a more technical guide, so more friendly for emergency managers and emergency management professionals. But this is also a great resource as well. Moving on, if you're part of a school or education network, the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, REMS, is a great website as well. You'll be able to access publications, guides, and templates for free. They have a lot of free webinars and online trainings. You can actually request free trainings as well. And then we have FEMA's Open Training. So Open is a web-based and self-guided training that is available for free online. You can become an Open instructor as well. This will be shared with you after today's presentation, and it provides 10 preparedness actions to help organizations remain open. And we also, if interested, we also provide the Open training as well. And then overall, just some next steps and what you can do now. We want you to do some really applicable work when it comes to learning about preparedness and emergency operations planning. So, start creating and assessing your plans. Initiate meetings and conversations with leadership about preparedness. Identify risks and hazards, prioritize them, and remember, practice those plans. And ultimately, remember that FEMA, we are a available resource and support network for you. And if you need anything, feel free to contact us via email, and please don't hesitate to reach out. So if you have any questions, please feel free to place that in the chat. And then we're actually going to go ahead and move on to our last session of the day, which is going to be Marc Fisher's presentation on emergency operations planning and his template. So
there was one question in the chat. See if I can find it here. It was up there. Oh, what are some other sources of communication in the event that cell towers are down?
Absolutely, thank you. Marc or Sarah, would you like to answer that question? So what are other sort of resources available if cell phone networks are down? What are other means of communication?
That's an excellent question.
Actually, this
I'll
is
let
gonna
Marc
sound
answer.
this is gonna sound interesting. If other things are what others in that, I'll tell you. I talk about this all the time. I live in a city. I live near Chicago. So I used to keep a hard line. Sarah, you might know this. I used to keep a hard line, especially because of this. Because the cell networks, oh man, my hair looks terrible. The cell networks can be jammed and they can go down, as you alluded to, because of network traffic. And believe it or not, like your hard line, like your old Ma Bell phone systems run on their own power, a separate power source. So that's like a good communications platform if you can afford it, because they're super expensive now. Hard lines for phones. Sarah, how about you? Got any other options?
Well, I suggest that people try to utilize texting as opposed to calling. A lot of times when the lines are jammed up but still available, you're more likely to get out a text message. And then the other recommendation I would give is that anybody who is in your household, I would have a meeting place designated. So if we can't reach each other and we can't get home, here's where we're going to meet. I'd also suggest having a backup one. So those are two options, and I really like the hardline option. Obviously, that is a cost, but yeah, those are two things that I would keep in mind. And I do know that somebody did mention radios. So if you know a ham radio operator, that is a good time to utilize their support. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Marc. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm gonna just get set up here. If you guys give me 1 second and get my stuff up.
And while Marc is getting his stuff set up, his presentation, here's our contact information on the slide. So you can email us at any time if you're interested in any of our trainings or have any questions. So this is our preparedness inbox. And I'll also put that in the chat, but if you're also interested in any sort of trainings, events, preparedness tips, feel free to sign up for our Region 5 monthly newsletter. So you can go ahead and scan this QR code on your camera, and then this will lead you to a link where you can place your email address where you can get a monthly newsletter from us.
Marc, you're muted.
Through this, and I'm not as good as my FEMA colleagues. So what I'm going to do is share a couple things with you. Hey, there's Sumayya. I'm going to share a couple things with you. Just explain who I am. I'm a RIM, and then we're going to hop over to the emergency operations planning. I don't drink coffee. I drink water. I'm just naturally kind of hyper like that. So please bear with me. So please bear with me. So first, I'm going to tell you a bit of who I am and what we do. Okay, so all right. Once again, my name is Marc Fisher. I am a regional emergency management specialist, and I'm hoping I can share the screen with you. Here we go. 1 and 2, and we're up. There we go. So my name is Marc Fisher. I am a regional emergency management specialist at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I hope you guys can see that. Can everyone see that? Check. Yes, no, maybe so.
Yep, you're good, Marc.
All right, got it. Cool. I'm going to cut my camera off to save bandwidth. And I'm dog sitting right now, so please don't mind if you hear barking. I'm dog sitting my kid's dog. So here we go. So I'm a RIM. What does a RIM do? Well, RIMs do human services. We have human service duties and disasters. You would know it as emergency managers. Those of you that are emergency managers, it's ESF6. While I don't really do the mass care portion, I do what's the human services portion, which is kind of taking care of people after disasters or post disasters. I serve as a subject matter expert on human service missions with FEMA, with the CDC, with, yeah, there we go. With the Department of Health and Human Services. I provide technical assistance to ACF grantees, states, and tribes when necessary. Hey, calm down. And I act as a human service liaison to other agencies. And that could be Homeland Security, CDC is an HHS agency, but any other, or State Department. I get passed around to those guys too sometimes. Some of the things I do is I participate in emergency repatriation missions. That's like a State Department mission that we partner with, and that would be people from overseas. A good example of that was in 2020 when the first people came over from China, the Wuhan group of folks that came over when the coronavirus started. I received them in Texas. I was in San Antonio, Texas, receiving those guys at an Air Force base. Sumayya might remember that. We were working together then, doing stuff. And then I perform damage assessments. So I can go do a human service damage assessment. Unlike some of my colleagues at FEMA, what I do is I look at the human service impacts, right? There's a daycare that's lost here, or how are we going to take care of these people? So think of me, a RIM, as kind of like a social service worker trained in disasters. That's the best way to say that. How can we help? Like I said, human service activities. We provide flexibilities to agencies because of our social service background and the agency that we work with. Let me close the curtain. The mailman's here. It's interesting how dogs don't like the mailman. I don't own a dog. I don't have a dog myself, but this dog doesn't like the mailman. I had never realized that they had this relationship with mail people. So one of the things I can do as a RIM is I can provide custom mission type to location. So I'm kind of like a jack of all trades and master of none. So you show me the disaster and your human service needs, and I try to come up with a plan to make it work. I'm a bridge between emergency management agencies and human services program. Case in point, I get Head Starts and child care centers ready for disasters, and I can work within ACF existing programs. That could be the Office of Child Care, the Office of Head Start, our Runaway and Homeless Youth Program, and any other programs that come up. So that's pretty much what I do and how I can help. So for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into preparedness and emergency operation planning. So hold on one second. I'll change windows. Changing windows. There we go. We're going to go here, and we're going to go here. Share window, and we are up. I hope you guys can see this. Can you see this? All right,
Yes,
so creating a comprehensive emergency plan. There you go. Let's can see that, and present view. There we go. So once again, thanks for coming on our show. I'm gonna kind of run through this real quick. Now, if you can see the slides, I'm hoping that you downloaded a Word document that was attached to that was sent out. We can send it out afterwards. Does anyone have that Word document? I can't see the chat, so
It's
at
at
the
the
moment, I
top
can't.
of the chat. If people scroll up to the top of the chat, they can find it there, Mark.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you scroll up to the chat, you can see it there. You can kind of follow along with me on this as I do this. So what I'm going to do is help you create a emergency operations plan, just what Sumayya was talking about. So let's talk about this, why we need to create a plan. So one of the things that we need to create plans is to save lives and avoid injuries. That's one of the main things you want to do. 2 is to promote an effective response. If a tornado happens or a flood or any kind of event happens, you want to have an effective response to various types of events. It's also to safeguard agency property and records. So if you have an agency that you work in and you have records, you want to save that computer from flooding, or you want to save those records from fire so you can use them later on. And as we know, FEMA is all about records, right? To make sure you can claim all that stuff. And then to restore conditions back to normal, steady state quickly. And then finally, to meet programmatic emergency requirements. Boom, boom, stamp, stamp. So ACF, the agency that I work for, the Administration for Children and Families, we have a lot of programs, a lot of social service type of programs. Like I said before, Head Start, Child Care. We're like, we put the human services and health and human services. That being said, my colleagues in those parts of the office, they have a lot of requirements for emergency preparedness. And if you or you know someone that runs one of the programs, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about making sure your child care centers have plans, your Head Start centers have plans, your runaway and homeless youth shelters have plans. Any kind of programmatic grantee we work with, you got to have a plan for some kind of disasters. So that's one of the other reasons you want to create a plan. All right, there you can see actually, those are FEMA colleagues of mine. That's Kim Hayward, who actually used to work. I used to work with her very closely. And this is us. The woman in the maroon is Mary Lee, and they are teaching Head Start. I would say program directors, like I guess key leaders, emergency preparedness stuff. One of our emergency preparedness classes. Me and my FEMA colleagues, Sumayya and Sarah, we have something called Head Start Emergency Preparedness Training, and we can talk to you guys about that offline, but that's a shot from one of the classes we used to teach at Red Cross before COVID. All right, next slide. Okay, so the template. So there's 3 basic structures, right? You got your basic plan, then you have your emergency procedures annex, and then your support annex. So the basic plan provides a general overview of your emergency plan. It sets tone by providing the purpose, structure, and requirements of the plan. The annexes, which are next, are like checklists used during an emergency. And the appendices are kind of like helper documents. Are helper documents in the other part of your plan, right? So you can add appendices. You can say, hey, we're going to add like a COVID appendix, or we're going to add I wouldn't say a COVID. You can say COVID. I would say a pandemic, or let's say an active shooter appendix. If you learn something new, you want to add something to, it's a helper document that can support other parts of the document. So let's say you have a pandemic preparedness section in your plan. And then you're like, okay, pandemic preparedness, let's say that's general pandemics, bugs, viruses, but COVID has specifics. So you can put a COVID appendix there, and that's kind of helps you along. So, all right, let's talk about the template. So what are the objectives? So the objective of the template is to help you create an emergency plan. And that's for your organization. Now, the way I got about doing this is our Head Start and our child care centers used to send these plans to me years ago when I first started. And what happened was I got to see kind of what people were writing in their plans, and plans were all over the place. Some plans were like 30 pages long, other plans were 2. And so this template is to help you kind of make your plan. And the way I had it, I did it was to make it as simple as filling out a Word document. And that's what I talked about with this Word document you should have received, and just following with what I'm showing you on the screen. So you want to use this Word document after the meeting, or if you have one now, use it to create your plan from scratch. We try to make it really easily understood. The plan that you create should be something that anyone can pick up and read, right? Because you don't know who's gonna be in charge during an emergency. So let's say, kind of like what Sumayya was saying, I used to run trainings, and what I would do is I would do like an event at lunch. I would say, hey, we're gonna send half the people out for lunch, and then we'd send some people out, and then I'd say, all right, power just went out, a storm just showed up, and now you only have half your staff. So then we'd have to see who was in the room, and they would have to run the plan, run the event from what they had. So it provides a structure that allows easy review and updates, because you want to change your plan based on your operating environment, where you live, what your threats are locally, and then the latest information. And it's also a way to provide an archive of information, because that's going to have a list of different things. It have phone numbers, it have contacts, and it have people. And you can see kind of like who's who in the zoo, where they are, what their roles are. And then later on, you can figure out, okay, this person did this, and now we're going to move them over here. Okay, so next slide. All right. So let's go to the template. So here's the template. All right. So in the bracket, see those brackets says child. I'm just going to use child care center. So child care center name. That's where you're in. Let's say it's a child care center, it's a Head Start center, it's a runaway and homeless youth center, or let's say it's some other program, your ESL class, or I don't know, your GED class. So you put that there. You put your center's name in there. You put the plan, your emergency response plan template. You can delete that. If you have an agency logo or an organization tribal logo, you can put your tribal logo there. If you want to put your address, put that there. I always recommend putting a date, right? So the dates are important because you should update these plans once a year at least, and I would say review them every 6 months just to make sure everything's good. So that way, if you have a date, you have, hey, this was reviewed in March, and then you'll know like in 6 months in September, hey, let's review this plan again. So you'll have a date to see when your last review or revision was. Once completed, it's a good idea to color code the book for easy recognition. So there's like this little red and blue bar that goes around here, but put something in there so people know what it is and see what it is. Okay, so let's go to the introduction. So this contains the following subjects: introduction, your purpose, your plan maintenance, and your approval statement. So now keep in mind, no plan is ever perfect, right? The National Response Plans was revised after 9/11 and after Hurricane Katrina. And keep in mind that your emergency operation plan is a living document. It can and should be modified to stay with current practices. So a comprehensive, you can read, you guys all can read it. A comprehensive site emergency plan must be developed, and all staff members must be trained in order to effectively respond during emergency. And once again, all staff members. So that would be your maintenance guy to your receptionist. They should all kind of know generally what the plan is. Although some people are going to have more key roles than others, like your maintenance folks, because they know how to turn off power and water and things. But everyone should know the plan, because you don't know who's going to be there when disaster strikes, because disaster doesn't make appointments. All right, so what's the purpose of your plan? Why are you creating a plan? And who will this plan affect, right? So these are the things you want to think of. So you got to remember the plan's designed to provide practical guidelines to enable staff to prepare and respond to different types of emergencies, right? Any emergency, in any emergency, the program's overriding mission is to, 1, protect life, right? That's your number one thing. 2, secure the facility and infrastructure, save the building. 3, resume program operations, steady state. So those are the things you want to get back to. So how do we get back there? And this is, once again, thinking through making your plan. One of the objectives is to address these following concerns, right? You want to address your personnel concerns, right? Who's assigned to do what? Who's who in the zoo, as I always say. Training. Who is trained to do what? So if you have once again, I hate to pick on the maintenance guys. If you have a maintenance person, what if something happens to the maintenance person? Maybe you should train all the staff. Well, in our Head Start class, we told everyone should be able to turn off the water and the electricity. From top to bottom, your receptionist to your maintenance guy, of course, knows all that stuff, but like everyone in the organization should be able to kill the power, because if something happens, a kid gets shocked or a person is being electrocuted, you should be able to kill the power if need to. And then equipment. What equipment is needed for the training? Fire extinguishers, right? If someone's, let's say you have an electrical issue, like a broomstick or something to push someone away from something. A list of equipment needed for both training and response will be maintained. If you have like we have AEDs in the office I work in, we're all trained on AEDs, myself included. And then drills. Exercises will be conducted periodically to test the effectiveness of the plan. You have a drill log, that's in Appendix D. Once again, like Sumayya said, if it's raining, we're training. And that's kind of how you should think. So like plan maintenance. So in an emergency planning committee should be established consisting of site staff from the following disciplines. Now keep this in mind. This is your plan, right? So like, do you have a director? Maybe they're called a director. Maybe they're called something else. Adjust this to you, but you should have like a director, like let's say, think of a director as some key leader that can make the decisions. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. Someone who's in charge. They have to have buy-in. Then your safety personnel, right? That would be like if you have security folks, or anyone that would be safety, because these are the people that are going to be like in action when these things happen. And then really important, your maintenance people. I would almost say the maintenance guy people ahead of the safety personnel, but your maintenance folks, because they're going to be able to turn things on, turn things off. They'll usually have keys to buildings and stuff. They'll usually have access, and they'll know a lot about the structure that you're working in. But don't leave people out. So you want to do the teachers and caregivers, because they have, like, if you have a program that has children, they have your most important assets, right? The children. And then your office staff, back to the administrative receptionist types, they need to know what's going on. And your food service staff, because they're going to have some key things like water and food and refrigeration, and they're going to know those things too. Once again, everyone should know this plan. It should be a plan that's not a bore to read. I've seen some that were bores and I've seen some that weren't, but it should be a plan that everyone could kind of get through and figure out, whether they're the director or whether there's someone else. Everyone should kind of know how this plan works. So once again, it's kind of like very general reading, nothing too technical. So we're going to continue. So in addition to site personnel, you should also, with this planning committee, try to get help from local agencies. And that's some of you on the phone, right? Some are in law enforcement. Some maybe are fire and medical. Some are in emergency management. Some may be health. So if you make an emergency operation plan for your organization, you should include these other partners in here, because like, who's going to show up if you have a fire? You're going to help put the fire out, but some kind of fire or EMS service is going to show up. Fire emergency medical service is going to show up to either help people. If you have some kind of incident with, let's say, I don't know, some violence or something else, you're going to need law enforcement. As we've seen with COVID goes a lot of places, right? So you're going to need to stay in touch with your local health department. And always, if you can get the emergency managers, it's great, because they're going to help you with planning and making good decisions. All right, so let's talk about the plan. So like I said, the plan should be reviewed and updated annually, changes when needed. Lessons learned from exercises or emergencies, always incorporate that stuff. Once again, this is your approval statement, and that's basically like, yes, we are going to do these things. This section is where you submit or your buy-in from your leadership and stakeholders. Like I said before, everyone's got like a unique role and can provide assistance in plan building and resource development. And you don't have to have all the positions on the list. You don't even have to have these positions. You can have different ones, like I said before. Adjust your list as needed. So let's get to the meat of this stuff, right? So let's look at this basic plan. And once again, there's a Word document. You just kind of follow along this slideshow. You'll see in the next slide, it has a page on it, and you just kind of fill in the brackets, right? So you want to think about your situations and your assumptions, your command and communication, staff response roles, recovery, which is like after it, debriefing. Hey, let's talk about it, and then deactivation. All right, nothing to see here. Let's move along. So what you want to do is think of a situation. So like your center sits on, I don't know, I'm in the city, right? 3 acres, that's huge for us. At Willow and Maine. And the site consists of 3 buildings. There's about 150 people in the site with 60 staff members. And then, what are the daily differences in population? In the morning, you might have more people. You might have parents doing drop-off. Or in the afternoon, you might have parents doing drop-off. In the middle of the day, you'll have kids outside doing stuff, or people outside doing some other things. Then you also want to insert any hazards, like we're near the train, or we're near a power plant, or like just downstate, there was some flooding or water stuff. I think it was a water boil order here in like Michigan, or not here in Michigan, but over in Michigan. No, yeah, there's a boil order in Michigan. I just saw that. So like, what are the hazards? There's a chemical plant. Maybe there's a hazard associated with that chemical plant. One of our sites was near railways. So they had like chemical cars. That was like their threat. So they had to like figure chemical cars into it. They're not worried about hurricanes. They're worried about like a train derailing. So you want to think of like where you're at, what your situation is. And, and this goes to assumptions, right? So during an emergency, centralized direction, i.e. senior staff, is the most effective way to approach management of an emergency operation. So, once again, who's in charge, right? The next one, in case of emergency, is beyond the capability of the site. Coordinate with the local emergency response. That goes back to your cops, your firefighters. I'm a cops, a kid, so I say cops. Law enforcement, firefighters, and your emergency managers. That's some things you should really think about in your plan. Command, right? Basic planning. The order of succession for your Head Start or early Head Start program. So once again, this is like a child care facility. So like the director, whoever is the boss, there's a boss, right? Then the deputy, or whoever you want to make the second in line. And then other individuals as determined. So if the director or the top person isn't there, then who's next in line, So you don't really want a situation where people are going to be battling out over I'm in charge, So you want it to be kind of established, right? So everyone knows what their roles are, everyone knows who's going to go next, and everyone knows what to do. So we're just talking about communications, right? So how do you notify people? How do you let people know? In my office, I have like 80 people I have to notify for events. How do I do that? Very difficult. We have something called Blackboard Connect, not endorsing it, but it's just a system. And what I do is I send a message out, and the traffic can go to like their cell phones, it goes to their emails. It gives them a call with my recording or a computer recording. But where you are, where you are. Some people live in areas where you don't have that kind of stuff, right? You don't have a lot of good cell reception. You use radios. So what's your communication? Establish it. 2-way radios, intercom, telephone, runners, a panic button, bells or sirens, or other methods. How do you communicate what happens in an event? And in some places they'll have like, Mr. Green is in the building and that means there's a shooter, or, some kind of code. So that way people don't get upset if something goes on. but everyone knows what to do next because you don't want to frighten people. Okay, so your basic plan, right? So once again, advisories for internal disasters would be issued by the director. So like this is an example, like your response. So you would think of, when you make your plan, you have to think of like who would do this, how they would do this. Who would you have at your organization that would be, I guess I wouldn't say the head start director is like the leader, the main leader, or the deputy director is like the main leader. So if none's present, who's next? Who's next, and how does that work? You know, because it's more streamlined and effective to have like decisions made by one person. I know it's not all organizations operate like that, but in an event you need like command and control. So one person should think like, hey, we're gonna do this. We're all gonna move to the left and stick with it. All right. So the next one is, what are some of the staff roles? So I've broken them down into 3 groups. You have your admin folks, your support group, and then your teachers group. So in the event of emergency, all staff persons will assume responsibility for the following actions. You have your notification of safeguarding of children, staff, and property, notification of authorities and center staff, initiation of steps to mitigate or contain the situation. If the killer bees show up, I wouldn't want to contain them. Mitigate it, go inside. And then implementation of evacuation procedures if needed or necessary, right? If needed or necessary. And once again, it's from whoever's in charge. So like briefing, deactivation, and recovery. So debriefing allows staff to talk about what happened, right? And receive emotional, we're in the 21st century, receive emotional support. And deactivation, that ends when the crisis is over. And then recovery actions usually continue for some time afterwards. So like you have a fire, if you put out the fire, you debrief. Is everybody okay? What do you guys think? How do you guys feel about that? Okay. Fire's over, everything's good. Recovery is going to be kind of like, well, we're still going to have to fix the shed because the shed caught on fire. That's going to keep going. So these are the support dependencies. That's in the Word document. So we're going with the dependencies that will help support the plan. And I told you about these earlier in the show, right? So you got like different ones for different things. General emergency. What's a general emergency? Kind of like a general garden variety of emergency. Then your medical emergency. Your weather, your evacuation, because evacuation is a little different, right? You have to evacuate the building. We're going to go to the tree over there. Everyone, we're going to go meet this place. What do you do in a fire? What do you do if there's a gas leak, right? How do you shut off the gas? What about a lockdown or a shelter in place, right? That looks different. What about a suicide? What about infection control actions, i.e. bugs, virus, weapons, right? That would be kind of like weapons would kind of be like I hate to say an active shooter because it seems like it's like all the time now, but active shooter. What if there's a fight? Like here, I live in Chicago. I live in Evanston, but I live in Chicago, and at one of the sites I used to work at when I worked in nonprofit was in a rough neighborhood, and even our Head Start classes, folks come to pick up their kids with guns, like pick up from Head Starts, right, or child kids. They're armed. They got heaters on them, so that's always a threat for you. A bomb threat, a bus incident. Let's say there's a bus crash. If you're out somewhere in rural America, you got more of a bus crash. Hazardous material event. That's like there was just a fire. There was just a fire around here. So chemical spill, intruder or hostage, radiological event. That's radiological events, area uncovered events and stuff. Sheltering procedures, terrorist events, animals. Some of you may be in more rural places. What if an animal gets in, like they have these funny jokes where like a deer gets in someone's house and the deer trashes the place, but what if it's something that's not a deer, something a little more dangerous? So then you always got to remember when you do your planning, this is page 13, identify somebody to meet the EMS personnel to guide them to the site. Like, hey, Tim or Tammy, go out there and meet these guys. These are these people from emergency management and bring them in here. So you have designated staff that know that this is their job to do. Isolated the infected individual. This is one for an example. Here's the emergency one. There was a whole bunch of them. I had to pull a bunch of them out. And then use bloodborne pathogen measures, masks, gloves, because you don't know what people have. You don't want to catch it. All right, gas leak. All right, so gas leak, that's something big, right? If orders detected in the building, who's going to shut off the gas? Everyone should shut off the gas, right? Everyone should know how to do it. The maintenance guy should be able to do it, but if the maintenance guy can't, someone should be assigned to shut off the gas. But everyone should know how to do it. Take the students out and put them at a safe distance from the building. Follow normal fire drill routes. You can incorporate that into a fire drill. And some of it will follow the same stuff, right? Follow alternate routes if the normal route is too dangerous. Let's say your normal route is like, hey, we're going to go meet over here, and it's across the road, and it's rush hour, and there's a lot of cars, and maybe you should have a backup route. And then remember, take the class Rouster, or that's basically accountability. That's your accountability button. So after an event, you need to have accountability. Where's everyone at? In Chicago, there was a fire in one of our buildings, and they didn't do accountability. This was a bunch of years ago, and they found like 7 people dead in the stairwell. Everyone thought they took off and just kind of went home. It was a government job, right? So they thought they just went home, but no, they didn't, and no one had conducted accountability. So this is kind of an important piece. So severe weather watch has been issued for an area near the center. So if this happens, right, you're going to monitor the NOAA weather, and some of you guys are out there in the country, so you know what I'm talking about. Bring everyone inside, close the windows and blinds, and prepare. So right now, I know I'm running out of time. We're going to get to these annexes. I hope this thing didn't end. I hope I'm talking to you guys. Yep, I'm still talking to you guys. I can see Sumayya. All right, so here's some annexes that will support your plans, and these are from earlier in the show. I was telling you about them. Staff assignments, training matrix, equipment inventory, and we'll just run through this because I'm out of time. Okay, so these are the different groups. So you should have an administrative group, a support group, and let's say this is like I would say an operators group, like a teachers group, because this is an example for teachers. So you got Anita's got to do first aid and security, and Anita's doing everything. She's a boss. You got Bob, who's on the call, right? Bob can do first aid. He can't do security. Carol, so you see there's a checklist. Kayla, she's out of the mix. She can't really do much. So Kayla is not real good in disaster, so we won't give her anything. Luke is good at evacuating people, and Paul might have some different roles. So you want to make sure you have a matrix like this, and you understand what everyone can do or what they can't do. So make sure Kayla doesn't do anything, because she might make it worse. All right, so have a plan for keeping in touch with parents and staff, right? So one of the things you want to do is make sure, like, whatever plan you have for your organization. We had a shooter in Chicago where I used to work, and some gang stuff. And then the parents heard about it, and then they all showed up, right? And it was real weird because they were like barricaded inside trying to figure out what's going on. And then the parents were trying to get inside. It was just a big mess. So you want to make sure you have a way of keeping in touch with the parents, and then you can inform them to what's the proper posture to take. Encourage parents to have a plan B for finding childcare for the children if it's closed during a pandemic or during let's say there's a fire. Learn whether local, state health departments can that regulate your childcare have your childcare plan. So make sure your local health departments have your plans. And if you have an ACF program like a childcare or a Head Start program, they're going to ask you to do that. So make sure your food plans are in line with their plans, and that's just making sure I mean, tribal governments are different in the state, but just make sure you're lined up with your headquarters. So this is COVID. This is COVID-19. I'm getting so tired of this stuff. All right, remember COVID-19. You want to reduce the spread, avoid exposure. You want to think about your special needs and your vulnerable populations. You want to make sure your staff's prepared. I always used to say time, how long you spend in touch with people, distance, 6 foot or more, and shielding. What kind of personal protective equipment you got. You want to think about different partner organizations that you work with, like the health department. I work with FEMA a lot, so I get a lot of info from FEMA. And then like, if you don't have like a Head Start or like this government program type of thing, create a business continuity plan. How is your business going to keep going? Because businesses are really important for the health of the community. So once again, if you're in a school thing, we'll just tap that again, accountability. So think of it as staff. You want to know accountability, where your people are, who's here, where they're located, right? If they're not there, maybe they're in the hospital. If any aid is needed, and if any aid is needed, you can get them aid. I got 4 more slides. I'm out of here. All right. So what you want to do on page 52, you can insert a map of your area. And that's where you make it personal. And then you would write in, these are my primary evacuation routes. This is my alternate route in case Godzilla shows up on the primary route. This is my handicap areas. We did one of these in Chicago where I work, and we figured out that there are some people that couldn't egress the building because of some steps and the way the ramps are built. We had to get that fixed. Once again, utility access shut off. Nobody gets shocked. Water goes off. Other information is needed, right? So it's recommended when you get to this page, just kind of make a diagram of your site. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be something that everyone can understand. So this is the last one. So page 54, include kind of immediate assistance stuff like to and from what location. So this is basically like when you report where you're at. You can do this on a radio. You can do this on a sheet of paper. This is in your communication. I'm Mark. I am in front of the building. I am headed to the city, the tree across the street, right? It's 2:00 on Monday the 15th. All the kids are okay. All the staff are okay. There's very little structural damage. There was just fire sprinklers that went on, that kind of stuff. So that's basic stuff for the plan. I have like a whole hour thing, but I pulled a bunch of stuff out just to run through this really quick. Do we have any questions? Because I can't see if questions pop up. Let me shut this down and I'll go back on. And back on camera. Do we have any questions? Sorry for running over a bit, folks. I hope we got people still here. And it looks like, we still got 20 people. Any questions, comments, concerns? Is there anyone that needs the Word document, or if you found it like helpful? If you do, you can shoot me an email, and you can shoot me or Robert an email, and we can get you that Word document and a PDF of the slideshow, and you can kind of follow along and fill out your forms. Oh, you want to? Oh, yeah. Deneen Morris, guess. Yeah. You want a copy? Sure. Send Robert or myself an email. I'm going to throw my email address in the chat. So give me a second, folks. I'm a hunt and pecker guy. I can't type. I'm an ex-Army guy. So there we go. That's my email. So if you would like a copy of this presentation in PDF form and a Word document, shoot me an email saying, please send me the presentation and the EOP plan, and I will send you the template. And you can adjust it to make it fit what you want. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, on my email, you see my signature block. You can call me back, email me, and I'll help you adjust for what you need. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for coming. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, all three of you. You did a great job. Any final questions for any of the three presenters? Hearing none. As Mark said, yeah, just shoot us an email and we'll get that out to you with the presentation and all the attached documentation that was in the chat up front. I know there were some folks that had some trouble perhaps accessing those files. So yeah, just send an email. We'll get that to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I had one more comment. I was going to say, this is Marc Fisher again. So if you guys enjoyed this show, we have plenty more stuff. Me and my colleagues at FEMA, like Sumayya said, don't hesitate to reach out with questions, but we have other programs that we run. Our Head Start Emergency Preparedness program is like a big hit. We've been running it since about 2013, 2014. And then we have other programs. I have other programs that we partner with. I didn't get to that in my RIMS presentation, but we do like a responsible dads thing called Ready Dads. Sarah could tell you all about that. For your teens and for pandemic preparedness, we have something called Zombie Apocalypse. And we have an anti-trafficking thing. I have an anti-trafficking program. So any of these things are designed to work. If you're an organization and you want to reach into the community, these are kind of presentations that are designed to reach in the community, to talk about preparedness, and to build resiliency in the individuals that you serve. And myself and my colleagues at FEMA, who are really, really, really good, we're well versed in presenting these and can do a presentation for you and then train you on some of them how to do it. Like the emergency preparedness is a train the trainer now, I believe, and they're well worth your effort to view. And that's about it. If you want more information, just reach out to me. You got my email, and I can also connect you with my colleagues at FEMA. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for participating, and thanks to the presenters one final time. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.